Hello chess friends and welcome to the Art of Chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit Decline series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from White's and from Black's perspective, and today we're continuing again with our Queen's Gambit Decline series and the so-called Tarrasch Defense. The Tarrasch Defense we have explained so far in our introduction video, so if you want to get a better understanding of this particular video, please also check out our intro video, because in that video we have already explained some important strategical and tactical ideas of this opening. So today we're analyzing the so-called Tarrasch Defense and the so-called Prague Variation. The Prague Variation is a very dynamic variation in which Black has, I think, decent chances to win the game. Black has, I think, really dynamic opportunities to go into the middle game stage. Of course, the main problem, many times we have explained it in the Tarrasch Defense, is that you are left with an isolated pawn, but sometimes this asymmetrical pawn structure can cause your opponent many problems, because sometimes when the game becomes really wild, then a tactical player could have, of course, good opportunities to win the game. So that's why our hero of this video will be the top grandmaster Daniil Dubov. That's why Daniil Dubov is also on the thumbnail, because Daniil Dubov is really a dynamic player and he's searching always for asymmetrical positions, for dynamic positions. Sometimes it's not good for him, sometimes it's good for him, sometimes he's winning games, sometimes he's losing game, but at least we love, of course, his game. So that's why in this video you'll see many Daniil Dubov games. So let's check out now the Tarrasch Defense. Let's check out now what is the Prague Variation of the Tarrasch Defense and what are the most important strategical and tactical ideas of this opening. So here, of course, the first move is the move d4. We have d5, c4, the Queen's Gambit. After e6, the Queen's Gambit declined, and after move knight to c3, we have now this most dynamic move, which is, of course, the move c5. And okay, we have said the best way here for White is to proceed with the move c takes d5. Don't mix it up with the semi-Tarrasch Defense, in which Black has already played the move knight to f6, but the semi-Tarrasch Defense we have also explained so far in our series. So if you're interested more in the semi-Tarrasch Defense, please also check out my series of this opening. So here, after move c takes d5, we have now the normal continuation e takes d5, and you see now, as we have mentioned also in the introduction video, White will not take here very often this move, this pawn on c5, because it gives, I think, Black decent opportunities to create dynamics in the center by pushing the pawn on d4. But there is always, as I mentioned it before, there is always this positional risk. It's somewhere in the air, this move d takes c5, not immediately, but maybe when White improves a little bit the structure, when White maybe gets a better development, when White maybe secures the square d4, because then with e3, knight to f3, maybe this d4 can be taken in one particular moment. Maybe you can expect then White finally to take with d takes c5. Then, of course, Black is simply left with an isolated pawn. So that's why here in the continuation, White delays simply the situation. White will not take d takes c5 immediately. If that happens, we have explained some tactical ideas, as I said in our introduction video. d4 will happen here for sure. So that's why here in the continuation, as we said, White delays the situation, plays normal development. Here we have knight to f6, and after move g3, which is now, in my opinion, one of the best ways here for White to proceed. The move g3 is really the best way, because now I think White has decent chances to get something out of this diagonal, and I think White has a comfortable game. So here the continuation, we're playing, of course, from Black's perspective, the normal move knight to c6, and now bishop to g2. Now comes the actual Prague Tarrasch Defense move, which is now the move c takes d4. In the beginning, it may seem to you that this is a strange move, because you're giving White the opportunity to get this knight centralized on d4. You are left now with an isolated pawn, but there is one positional problem of this move knight takes d4, because one of the most important ideas now of Black's here is to get an extra tempo with the move bishop to c5. So the knight has to be maneuvered again, and the problem is now the knight is not protecting anymore the h4 square. The knight is always a good defender when you play a fianchetto, like White has already played. So White has a great bishop on g2. It's creating, of course, great attacking opportunities, but sometimes when you weaken a little bit the pawn structure in front of the king, because most of the times White will castle on king side, many times this fianchetto, when the bishop is left alone a little bit, when the knight is not protecting anymore the king, then you can expect maybe even a flank attack with h5 h4, because you see the pawn structure is already weakened, the knight is not controlling the h4 square anymore. So these are now the most important tactical ideas of black. So of course black has some problems with this isolated pawn on d5, but it's not so easy to take it out immediately, because even if you react somehow with knight takes c6, b takes c6, we'll analyze also in the continuation of the video this particular position. You see now you basically have improved the pawn structure. Again, there are structural problems here also for black, because black could be vulnerable here to some with some rook to c1 ideas, queen to c2 ideas, because here the bishop is a little bit loose on the board, and also here the pawn on c6 could be here a long-term weakness. So that's why we'll analyze also this line. But as we said, here after move bishop to c5, many times you get this one, a counterattack, knight to b3, and now bishop to b6. And maybe if you ask yourself the question, what happens if white simply now takes here the pawn on d5, because it's 3 times attacked? I can guarantee you that it's not so easy to play now from white's perspective this game, because even if you take here knight takes d5, here bishop to e6 can happen. There are now several ways how white could make progress if you try knight takes f6, and of course queen to f6. And the problem is now that white has lost, I think, a little bit the activity. You see, the knight is really on a natural square. The knight is not on a good square. The knight doesn't have good control now in the center of the board. The queen in this particular scenario has paralyzed a little bit the bishop's activity, so the bishop cannot move. Then you lose probably your b2 pawn, and in the long term we can also expect some moves like a rook to d8. Then the queen has to move, and you see when the queen comes maybe here on c2, then the queen becomes again a new target for maybe the knight. So that's why in my opinion, taking out the pawn here, let's go back to this critical moment of now this opening stage. If after I have bishop to b6, if white takes out, then we can simply play bishop to e6. So it's now, I think, a pleasant game simply for black. If black, for instance, get challenged with this move, knight takes b6, then we can simply take queen takes d1, king takes d1, and now a takes b6. And again, you may think this is not a good position for black because white is now the bishop pair. White is, I think, a great position because white is up a whole pawn. But actually, again, I think black should not be worried here, because there is again this tactical threat with bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and then rook takes a1, and also maybe ideas of rook takes a2, then rook takes a2, and then bishop takes b3, also take out the rook here on a2. So that's why many times I think white in this particular scenario will simply undermine the pressure, will even give up the light square bishop for knight. Still, I think this is playable for black. The engine gives here equal chances for both sides. So this line in which white is taking now the pawn in the center, I don't think it brings so much for white. I think that it's a drawish position. So as we said, let's see now one game. It was a game played by the Indian Grandmaster Rahul against Adam Turkaev. Here Turkaev got challenged, but with this move knight to d5, played now the move bishop to e6, e4 was played. Here white tried to centralize the knight further, but now with bishop to g4, you see the queen get challenged, queen to d3 was played. Now knight takes d5, we have e takes d5, and now castling. Great move here by Turkaev, forcing now white also to castle, because taking is not an option because you lose the queen here on the d5. Castling, now knight to e5. Here we have queen to c3, rook to e8, bishop to e3, and now rook to c8, attacking the queen. We have queen to b6, a takes b6, and here the queen had to move, but now knight to f3, mission accomplished, as we said, because of this weakness here, because the e4 pawn was pushed. Now there is a huge hole in the position here in the continuation. Bishop to f3, and here bishop to f3 was played. The game ended in a draw, but I hope you realize this is really an unpleasant game for white, because black is now the light square bishop. White lost the light square bishop, and it was really a positional struggle, the game. So the game ended in a draw, but as I said, in my opinion, this line is not so bringing so much here for white. So the game will be in the description below. As I said, the game ended in a draw. Maybe you can analyze then the whole game for yourself. That's not the point. I wanted to show you how when white takes out the pawn in the center of the board, then white loses a little bit the activity in the continuation of the game. Black has, I think, a decent game to equalize. So let's check out now one great game here played by Daniil Dubov with the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen. I will say immediately Magnus Carlsen won the game here from white's perspective, but still I decided to show you this game because I think Daniil Dubov played an outstanding, dynamic, really wild game in that you can use as a cornerstone if you want to study the Tarrasch defense more, but still you cannot really play sometimes when with like Daniil Dubov. Even Daniil Dubov, I think, missed some clear tactics here, but as I said, still I wanted to show you this game because it had really some beautiful tactical elements. So here we have reached again the same positions. Now Daniil Dubov plays against Magnus Carlsen again this Prague variation move, c takes d4, knight to d4. We have bishop to c5, again the same position, knight to b3, bishop to b6. So this position you will reach, I think, millions of times if you maybe a Tarrasch defense player, if you choose to play the Prague variation. So here Magnus Carlsen, of course, wants to create winning chances. He doesn't want to take out the pawn on d5. He doesn't want to lose activity. Play simply now here kingside castling. And we have talked about isolated pawn position in our introduction video. So under the number 1, we have now reached the basic strategies of isolated pawn. So themes for black are here: d5, d4 break, so sacrificing even sometimes the isolated pawn just in order to let this position explode. We have reached this position in our previous example. And now themes for white are blockading the isolated pawn or trading off pieces here to reach maybe the endgame stage. So as I said, if this game maybe reaches the endgame stage and then you're left with an isolated pawn, it's not so good for black because maybe in an endgame this could be a long-term weakness. So that's why you have to make something with this isolated pawn if you want to play an isolated pawn's position. So if you don't want to have a isolated pawn, so don't play the Tarrasch defense. That's simply my suggestion. So if you want to play the Tarrasch defense, you can get this kind of a position. So here Daniil Dubov, I think, plays a brilliant move d4 immediately because you have to use your isolated pawn. Now at least what we have gained here is a space advantage on the 4th rank. So when it comes to space, black has a slight advantage. But in the continuation, of course, knight to a4, here played by Magnus, we have castling, bishop to g5, attacking the knight on f6, paralyzing a little bit the queen. The queen is a little bit overloaded, we have to really say it, because the queen is also protecting the bishop on b6, so there is now a tension. The queen is used here only as a defensive piece. But when you're playing the Tarrasch defense, my suggestion is here that you should allow your opponent to even double up your pawn structure, sometimes even to take out the pawn on d4, sometimes even to double up your pawn structure here on the f-file. That's not the point of the Tarrasch defense. The point of the Tarrasch defense is that you want to create dynamic play, and that's exactly what Daniil Dubov is doing. He plays first the counterattack, because if he loses in one particular moment, maybe the battle around the square d4, it's something also here for Magnus Carlsen to worry here the weak square on e2. So in the continuation, we have rook to e1. Magnus protects now the pawn on e2. We have now h6 attacking the knight. And now comes, I think, sort of a line that you will face many times. I played this position many times from white's perspective, and I used also this game many times as a cornerstone for myself while playing as white. I don't play the Tarrasch defense with the black pieces. I played many times against the Tarrasch defense, and I played basically the same move many times, the same mover like Magnus Carlsen is doing here. First knight takes b6, which is forcing now a takes b6. You cannot take, of course, with the queen to b6. Then I think you will get your fun here with bishop to f6 and g takes f6. It's a little bit, I think, too much of a weakness here on f6. So that's why a takes b6 still we can tolerate, because with this move at least we have opened the a file. At least we have created some kind of an attacking opportunity here on one side of the board. So here bishop takes c6 played by Magnus Carlsen. We have b takes c6. This is everything is pretty much forced, and everything is pretty much even the best suggested line by top engines. We have now bishop to f6, queen to f6, and again we have reached now similar position like in our previous example, in which okay, white gained the centralized pawn, but white has lost now the most important piece here on the board, the light square bishop. So it's now struggle. It's about an equal middle game. Here the continuation, Daniil Dubov played queen to d8. We have queen to c3. Here Magnus Carlsen doesn't want to take, of course. Queen takes d8, then rook to d8, and now suddenly you could maybe lose here a little bit the battle on the d file. Even if you compete here, then I think bishop to e6, or here bishop rook takes d1, rook takes d1, then bishop to e6 is, I think, simplifying the game. There is not a good way how to protect this, I think, in one particular moment. Here bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and the game should probably end in a draw. So that's why Magnus still wanted to stay with the queens on the board, played queen to c3. We have now c5, protecting of course the c6 weakness. We have now a rook to d1, attacking the queen, queen to e7, and now knight to c1. Here Magnus Carlsen is trying to get the knight on f4. A very important maneuver, because the knight on f4 is at least protecting the g2 square. So here we have said, after giving up the light square bishop for knight, Daniil Dubov lost his most important piece on the board. Sorry, I have to do something. Run out of my Mac is running out of power, so I had to put on the charger. Sorry. So here, as I said, knight to d3, knight to f4 is now the main motif, main defensive motif, in order to protect your g2 square. So here in the continuation, great now move by Daniil Dubov. As we said, because the knight in the beginning has left a little bit the king side, now it's not protecting anymore the h4 square. Now Daniil Dubov is trying to provoke some weaknesses by playing h4 himself. So here in the continuation we have now a3. Very important move by Magnus, because he wants now to play finally knight to d3, knight to f4, but then of course the a2 is a little bit loose. So you see, this a file attack gives I think black here extra time, extra tempo in order to create something. So h4, we have knight to d3, here rook to a4, knight to f4, and here bishop to g7, bishop to b7, rook to d3. We have now brilliant move, rook to e4, although now I think comes the first mistake by Daniil Dubov. Actually, she should have played maybe h takes g3, after maybe something like h takes g3. Now I think there is even this opportunity, rook to f4, here even to sacrifice the rook. And it surprises me, actually. I think Daniil Dubov is a top grandmaster. He's a great tactician. I think he had maybe this move somewhere in his mind. I'm not sure why didn't he play it, but as I said, after g takes h4, the game becomes really complicated here to defend. You have to play rook to f3, and now after rook to e6, there are even opportunities here to play rook to g3. There is now really only one way to escape. You have to create some breathing spaces for the king and try to march here maybe towards the queen side. So this is a tactic that Daniil Dubov missed. He played even a wilder line. He played rook to e4. Here we have f3, and here Daniil Dubov overreacted, I think. Here he shouldn't have played this wild line. He played simply h takes g3. Here Magnus Carlsen took, and here after a couple of moves, finally Magnus Carlsen defended the position. Here after move f6, now Magnus played the check, king to h7. Here we have rook to g4, but Magnus Carlsen, as we said, top grandmaster, simply defended this position, and in this position after queen to b7, Magnus won the game. But as we said, here rook h takes g3 with rook takes f4 would be really brilliant move. I think it would lead into a complicated line here for Magnus Carlsen. Maybe here it was a drawish opportunity for Daniil Dubov. But we can say I think this was an instructive game in which Daniil Dubov applied the most important attacking ideas of the Tarrasch defense, in which Magnus Carlsen really struggled here, found really brilliant defensive moves, defended the position eventually, and outplayed Daniil Dubov. So let's check out now another example how Daniil Dubov played it a little bit better. Here again with the same position. His opponent was top grandmaster Shakhtar Mamedjadov. Here with the white pieces, again Daniil Dubov faced the same opening line. Here Shakhtar Mamedjadov played an interesting line. He played the knight to a4, challenging the bishop immediately, because he doesn't want to allow here Daniil Dubov maybe to play d4 immediately. If d4 happens, then maybe this pawn can be challenged. So here the Mamedjadov takes, knight takes b6, we have a takes b6, and he played already immediately in an early stage of the game this blockade idea around the square d4. We have said that the ideas of white when white is facing an isolated pawn is of course to create a blockade. So now with this announcement, I think it's a great positional idea here by Shakhtar Mamedjadov to really simplify the game, playing knight to d4 or bishop to d4, really simplifying the game, and then try to get the best out of this. So here again Daniil Dubov plays this very important move. I think you have to be familiar with this move. with the move h5. You have to weaken a little bit the pawn structure h4, h5, h4, because, as we said, the knight has slapped the defense of the king side. So here in the continuation Shakri Mamedjarov castle, we have now h4, we have bishop to g5, we have now h3, really great attack by Dubov, we have bishop to h1, and now rook to e1, rook to e8. Again, the same motif in which if something gets cleared here, if of course white takes here the d5 pawn, then you could lose also here the e2 pawn, because even if you try here something like, let's see, like bishop to f6, queen to f6, if you take out with the queen, it's not so good, you lose simply your e2 pawn. If you take with the bishop, again, it's not even better, because then rook to d8 is happening and your bishop is a little bit stuck here, so it's not a good position, I think, here anymore for white. So it's really hard for white sometimes to take out the centralized pawn. That's why after move rook to e8, again, also here Shakimamedjarov defended this position with rook to e1. So we have now bishop to g4, we have a3, queen to d6, we have queen to d2, queen to e5 after f3, bishop to e6, and after a couple more moves, the both players agree to draw. So here I hope you realize it's not such a bad isolated pawn, because this pawn can be further supported with rook to d8. The threat is again to advance the pawn, liberating also the light square diagonal for this powerful bishop on e6. So as I said, in my opinion, this is not such a position in which you have worries with your isolated pawn. So the game ended in a draw, and the game will also be in the description below. So let's check out now really a brilliant game here by Hikaru Nakamura against Daniil Dubov. Again, the same position. We have now again this idea d4, knight to a4. Here we have bishop to g5, attacking the knight on f6, rook to e8. We have knight takes b6, a takes b6, and now e3. And here the game becomes really wild, as the pawn, the main strength sort of, or the main weakness, you can call it like this, because it's really wild to play an isolated pawn game, isolated pawn middle game, in which the pawn structure is really imbalanced. Now after move e3, here Hikaru Nakamura allows Daniil Dubov to play the move d3, and the game becomes really complicated, because the pawn is really annoying there. Although the engine gives here slightly better position for white, but I would not love to face such an such a dynamic pawn like this, because you have to protect your position somehow, and the queen gets a little bit stuck, although you have this powerful pin, but this is not something that you should undermine. So that's why here in the continuation bishop to f6, we have now a brilliant move here by Daniil Dubov. G takes f6. You see the pawn structure gets more and more gets wilder, but here I think this powerful d3 pawn is something that bothers now Hikaru Nakamura in the continuation of the game. So here a3, we have bishop to e6 attacking here the knight. We have rook to c1, rook to c8, rook to c3, and now knight to e5. Here you see how Daniil Dubov is protecting the pawn. We have knight to d4, rook takes c3, and after b takes c3, again I'm pointing out it's a complicated game. After a couple more moves, both players again agree to a draw. So I'm not going to show you really the whole games. That's not the point of this video. The point is that you really see opportunities for both sides here. As we said, finally, although here black has a huge weakness on f6, there is also here maybe the weakness on h6, on g7, but this isolated pawn is something, as we said, that bothers now in the continuation of the game Hikaru Nakamura, and as I said, the game ended in a draw. So let's see now different opportunities again here for white and for black. So after move knight to d4, we have now again this move bishop to c5. Here's a game played by Rothstein against Daniil Dubov, and here his opponent, Daniil Dubov's opponent, tried this idea that we have talked about in the beginning. Knight takes c6, you will reach many times the position, because after b takes c6, okay, we have improved our pawn structure in the center of the board, but there is now a huge position problem. The c-file attack is something I think that bothers you now in the continuation of the game. So rook to c1, queen to c2 will happen, and you could face now some c-file problems. The bishop is a little bit loose on the board, and also the c6 pawn could be a long-term weakness. So here in the continuation, queen to c2 immediately by white. Daniil Dubov castles, and now bishop to b6, knight to a4. This position has been played many times, attacking simply this powerful bishop. Here in the continuation of the game, bishop, sorry. So here in the continuation, after move, let's go back, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. So after move bishop to d7, protecting the c6 pawn. In the continuation we have b3. Here white tried to develop simply the dark bishop, but now again Daniil Dubov plays this normal idea, rook to e8, attacking the e2 pawn, waits a little bit after bishop to b2. Now again this motif h5 h4. This is a move I think you see many times. Don't be surprised if your opponent plays it. If you play the game as white, if you're playing as black, you should do it, because undermine a little bit the pawn structure here is a great idea. At least weaken it a little bit, then the bishop gets more better. Here maybe we can try queen to c7, attacking the dark square further. We have seen h4 h3 could be also an opportunity to kick away further the bishop, so it's now not so easy for white to defend the position. So here in the continuation we have e3. Here Daniil Dubov played h4 immediately, knight takes b6, and after a takes b6, okay, black has lost now the bishop pair, but I think now the pawn structure gets better and better for black. Now these pawns are dynamic. If we manage maybe to push here on c5, maybe play something like bishop to e6, bishop to c6, getting rid of this light square bishop. Before that we can play h3, trying maybe to attack further the light squares. It could be not a pleasant game here for white. So after move queen to c3 was played, we have rook to c8, rook from a to d1, and now h takes g3, f takes g3, and now rook to e6 here by Daniil Dubov. And here his opponent tried to open the center of the board, but here Daniil Dubov first protected everything. We have rook to f4, rook to e8 takes, and here after knight takes d5, here it was a very important move by Daniil Dubov to play queen to f8, protecting now the g7 weakness. So now at least the knight gets centralized. Here in the continuation, a risky idea by white, bishop to d5. Okay, you will probably get your pawn, but after here, even if you take the rook to d5, then you are facing many light square problems in the near future. I think black will destroy tactically here white in the continuation, because you cannot protect anymore your light squares. Meanwhile, white cannot attack so easily the dark squares, because still with f6 we can protect everything. So here you cannot take the pawn. As we said, rook to f1 was played. We have now f6 protecting the dark squares, queen to d3. We have queen to f7, bishop to d4, we have b5, now simply g4. Here, of course, white is trying to open the position with the move g5. Here in the continuation, rook to e4, trying to simplify the game by trading off the rooks. We have h3, and now queen to e6 here, a very powerful battery by Daniil Dubov. Rook to f2, we have g4, rook to d1, and now queen to d6. Here, bishop to c8, now maybe with ideas bishop to b7, then of course trying to somehow push the pawn and opening the position for the light square bishop. So here queen to g3, queen to e6, now finally getting the rook on the second rank. We have queen to d5, takes, trying to trade off the queens, but when you're on the attacking side, you don't want to simplify the game. Great attack here by Daniil Dubov. We have queen to d5. But actually, you see how weird chess is. You took a pawn, but actually you open up your position for your opponent, because of course here Daniil Dubov first attacked the queen, and now the bishop, okay, maybe not immediately, but in one particular moment the bishop will get into the game, and now the light squares are basically unprotectable. So here bishop to f2, we have a rook to e2 attacking the bishop. You have to protect it, and now rook to c2, queen to b6, queen to f3 attacking, and now king to h7, first securing the king. And in this position here white resigned. Here bishop to d5 is again a serious threat. There's nothing that can be done, and white resigned. So you see, getting rid of this isolated pawn was, I think, a brilliant idea here by Dubov. White rushed into tactics, simply took out the pawn, which she should not have done. Should have played the blockade idea. Never should have allowed this bishop to get into the game, and I think the game would end in a draw. So let's check out now one last game of these ideas. Here it's again great gameplay by Levon Aronian against Magnus Carlsen. Now we see how Magnus plays this Tarrasch defense with this idea knight takes c6, b takes c6, castling, and again this idea queen to c2 with maybe some discoveries. You see many pieces are on the c file, so this is now the main motif of white. So here bishop to b6, knight to a4, attacking always the bishop. We have again this idea bishop to d7, b3, and now rook to e8. Basically the game is similar like the game that we have analyzed before. Bishop to b2, and now h4 again, h5 and h4 here. In this particular scenario, Levon Aronian played here with the white pieces, tried to block out this potential h4 move, but again I'm pointing out this motif h5 h4 you should be really familiar. Okay, now in this particular position white defended the h4, but still we can say that with the move h4 we have provoked further weaknesses, so which is I think a huge thing when we understand the position more. So here knight to e4, great move by Magnus Carlsen, because there's not, I think, a good way to get rid of this knight. Maybe you can do it by forcing your knight back to c3, but you're not giving up your bishop for a knight here on e4. We have talked about the problems, and you have seen in our previous example when white gave up the bishop for a knight, and even if white gets a pawn here, then you can face really this problems on light squares. The bishop will come into the game, the queen can maybe sneak in here to h3. So as I said, it could be a huge problem for white. So that's why this move h5 is very important to force h4, or you can play h4 then afterwards and then force further weaknesses, but then maybe to occupy the light squares, try to attack the light squares, because as we said in the beginning, the knight is not on f3. That's the main problem, I think, when it comes to defensive ideas here of white. So here after move knight to e4 we have e3, rook to c8, protecting now a little bit further the c6 pawn, because maybe we want to play more free with our light square bishop. Here in the continuation, knight takes b6, a takes b6. Okay, again we have lost our powerful dark square bishop, but at least we have now again improved our pawn structure here. So here in the continuation we have queen to d1, bishop to f5. Here Magnus Carlsen even sacrifices the pawn, but now in order just to build this powerful battery, now we know our goal. We want to simply get rid of the key defender in front of white king, which is of course the light square bishop. So here queen to d1, we have c5, we have rook to e1, rook to d8, we have rook to c8, and now this idea bishop to h3, queen to f3, here f6, bishop takes h3, queen to h3, here rook to d1, b5. We have queen to g2. Of course, Magnus Carlsen doesn't want to trade off the queens. He doesn't want to simplify the game. He has provoked several weaknesses in front of white king. We have now f3, knight to d6. We have g4, d4, breaking here and opening the position. Queen to d2. We have queen to d5, attacking the pawn, and now very nice move here by Magnus Carlsen, c4. So he's locking further the dark square bishop. The dark square bishop gets paralyzed by its own pawn. So here sacrificing another pawn was really a brilliant idea, because now with c4 Magnus is opening the position, and here unfortunately for Levon plays now a huge mistake. Probably it was better here maybe to defend the position with move king to f2, protect this very important pawn in front of the king, but here Levon didn't react correctly. Bishop to a3, we have queen to f3. Now Levon tried to defend this position with the queen, but now the queen gets more and more active, and suddenly it's not a comfortable game anymore for the Armenian top grandmaster, because also the d4 pawn is hanging. And here I want to stop. It was a brilliant game by Magnus Carlsen, and Magnus won also the game. The game will be also in the description below. So I hope you realize these ideas. We have seen great games here by Daniil. We have seen great games by Magnus Carlsen. In the future we're analyzing a little bit more this Prague variation from white's perspective. We have seen now ideas for black, but we should also see ideas for white. I think it will be a powerful opening that we can study, because it becomes asymmetrical, it becomes dynamic. really top grandmasters are playing it. You see Magnus Carlsen is playing Daniil Dubov. When they have the day, it can become really one of the best games that you can see, because the games are so wild. So especially for a great attacker like Daniil Dubov, this is a brilliant opening. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this analysis, and I hope you will study the Tarrasch Defense, because it's a brilliant tactical opening. If you want to study the Tarrasch Defense more, check out our previous analysis with this brilliant Stockfish game. And if you want to study the same Tarrasch and some other Queen's Gambit declined openings, here check out our Queen's Gambit decline series so far, with some great defenses like the Qd3 defense and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.